Hey, Burnie, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Let me go ahead and get right into it. So, first of all, I wanted to ask you about I know that just from watching the RT podcast over the years and watching different interviews you've done, I know that you didn't initially intend to get into film or specifically, the very uh, unique thing that Rooster Teeth became. So, I was curious if you could tell me a little bit about what that transition was like for you, starting to realize that film might be of interest to you.
Well, I always had an interest in storytelling, and I always had an interest in writing, more so than anything else. I had a great English teacher in high school named Maxine Thomas, who was extremely supportive of creative writing and was just a fantastic mentor to have. So I was always interested in it. I just like a lot of people thought, well, that's not a viable career. I came from lower middle class family, so I thought I got to make a living. I actually started off as pre med because at the time being to going to study to be a doctor was what a smart kid did, and I identified as being a smart kid, and so I thought, okay, I'll go do that, and just wasn't cut out for that. Didn't enjoy it at all, and then switched to computer science, and because I had so many hours of biology and organic chemistry and everything else, this was at the University of Texas. I was on campus uh, about 40 hours a week, but only had probably about 12 hours worth of classes because I had to take everything in a linear fashion. And
Mhm.
so I wandered down to TSTV, which was Texas Student Television, and then started to figure out how I could start to flex those creative muscles, learn to edit, learn to shoot, things like that. It was really being inspired by Robert Rodriguez, who had made El Mariachi uh, at University of Texas like 2 years before me, and then also just having this lifelong need to kind of tell stories and want to do creative things.
So how quickly did you get plugged into that? I know that you started a show called Sneak Peek, is that right?
Yeah, I have weird
So,
two weird longevity like records in my life. One is Sneak Peek is now the longest running student run television program in the world. It's been running for like 30
wow.
years at this point. And then Red vs. Blue was, at the time was the longest running web series of all time, longest continuous running series. So it's like it's strange. I never wouldn't think that I'd have two big longevity milestones, but here we are. Yeah, so I started Sneak Peek, and like a lot of things, it was starting out. I started Sneak Peek so that I could get tickets to go see free movies because I learned that all the major studios had these reps on campus that would try to get students to go watch, free early versions of the movie so they get word of mouth going. And
Mhm.
so I started a movie review show in order to get free tickets to go see movies, and it just kind of snowballed from there. We had some really cool interviews that we got that we should have never gotten as university students, and then that also sparked you know, relationships with other people like Matt Hullum, who I met there, and Joel Heyman at TSTV. I started working on projects with Matt and Joel that were film related,
Mhm.
and then they went off to LA after school, and so I was in Austin, and I had a great tech job, and it was really hard to stay in Austin in like 1996. That was a hard town to get a job in. It's not anymore.
Mhm.
And this was right before the dot com era, so I was like right there in Austin during the dot com boom. That's when I met Jeff Ramsey, Gus Sorolla, and Jason Saldana, and Dan Godwin, who plays Donut in the series. And we all started kind of tooling around and doing fun projects together. It was a lot of web stuff, a lot of blog stuff, like written magazines. Like
Yeah.
Jeff came out of like the skateboarding like, zine culture, and so we were doing a lot of things like that, and we were kind of like jumping in and out of each other's projects. And then I was working on Jeff and Gus on a blog site where it's called Drunk Gamers, just like Sneak Peek. We were trying to figure out a way to get free video games, and that was it. That was the whole goal for the website. But we wrote for that site for 3 years, I think, and we only got one free game. We got a Blinks the Time Sweeper, about a time traveling cat with a vacuum. That's all we got. And
Yeah.
I was the Xbox guy for that, and when you were the Xbox guy, that meant you were the Halo guy. So I was doing Halo every single week. That's all anybody wanted to talk about was Halo, Halo, Halo. And
Yeah.
then I had all my equipment from back when I was making projects with Joel and Matt back in college, and thought, okay, I'm gonna start shooting video in Halo and start putting video out there because not many people are doing that these days. I was doing tips and tricks, and then one day I thought, hey, what if I letterboxed out the gun and the ammo counter at the top. There's no score in Halo, at least not on the main HUD. And I letterboxed it out, and I thought, well, this kind of looks like a movie. And so I just decided to sit down. I recorded some dialogue with Jeff and Gus, and made the first episode of Red versus Blue.
Yeah.
And that's like a 10-year story right there. And Red versus Blue took off like a rocket, but it was like it's one of those really rare overnight successes where all of a sudden you just start seeing the numbers fly, and it's
Mhm.
really crazy. But it took 10 years to get to that overnight success.
I know there was like one or two Machinimas before Red versus Blue, correct? Did you know about these?
I didn't know what Machinima was.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I didn't even call it that. Like we literally got a phone call one day that told us that what we were doing was called Machinima, and there were other people doing it. What set us apart, I think, and why it took off was Halo was popular, but the other thing about Machinima before Red versus Blue, most Machinima was in the game. Like for the early stuff, like Diary of a Camper from Doom or Quake,
Mhm.
which is the first ever Machinima, you had to download like a map demo file, a WAD file, and play it in the game in order to watch the Machinima. And because of my background of making movie projects with Matt, I was encoding to QuickTime, which wasn't great. It wasn't like having an in-browser player to play video, but it was at least something that people had a QuickTime player or a WMV player where they could watch it.
Yeah, so they had to download it from the website to then look at it on their computer.
Yeah, they had to. We did a lot of tech support in those days. You had to
Yeah.
save the file to your computer and then play it on a separate player.
Yeah. So what was the landscape like of that? Because I grew up, I was like
Man,
6 years old in 2005 when YouTube came
wow.
out. So my whole life is like, obviously, if you want to make something, there's these clear cut ways to do it, platforms. Like, like what does that even look like when how am I going to get this out to other people?
Well, the big site at the time, like if you did it today, you'd probably try to like, well, maybe we can post it on Reddit, and get a bunch of upvotes on Reddit, and it'll hit the top of all, and that would be incredible.
Mhm.
Back in 2003, that meant Fark.com. You wanted to get on Fark, you wanted to get on Slashdot, you wanted to get mentioned on Penny Arcade, because Penny Arcade, along with the comic strip, has Tycho's blog as
Mhm.
well, and that was a really important thing to be on. Um, and we got on all three of those, and it just kind of took off. Fark was definitely one where they picked it up and they would post our episodes every single week. Gabe and Tycho really embraced us, invited us out to the very first PAX as well. But yeah, we were just it was interesting because not all the mechanisms existed, not even like a magnitude lower of the all the tools that people have for uploading. But there also meant there wasn't all that noise as well because not everyone was uploading things. So there was a feeling at that point in time that if you had something that was really good on the internet, a good piece of content, it was almost impossible not to have people see it because there just wasn't that much out there. But the
Yeah.
barrier was to how to get things up and how to get them online. Like for instance, we had to host all of our own videos. So when we got a huge viral video, that was an expensive proposition. We were
Mhm.
paying as a after work hobby, we were paying about I was putting out about $15,000 a month was the first month estimate for the server bills. But then luckily we had
Wow.
people in the community who started hosting it for us. We started to embrace things like BitTorrent. And then even at some point, Microsoft, they needed something that was very high volume and a lot of bandwidth to test some of the things that they were doing. So as a special beta program, we got into like somebody that was housing all of our videos for like 2 or 3 years. Not
Wow.
not at all associated with Halo, just somebody at Microsoft who needed lots of video content that was being downloaded on a regular basis.
So how early into the process were you making money back from this?
Well, we had to. So that was the other thing. So because money started going out so fast.
Mhm.
Because the more popular you were, like that meter just started running as soon as people started watching your video. So we immediately had a challenge of okay, how are we gonna not how are we gonna be able to continue this? Because if we couldn't afford paying $13,000 a month. It just wasn't
Mhm.
feasible for us to do that, for free, just for a joke. And so we came up with two things right out of the gate. One was T-shirts because T-shirts were like the currency of the internet back then.
Mhm.
Probably the most popular series at that point in time was a show called Homestar Runner, still going. They make episodes pretty intermittently these days, but boy, back in 2001, 2002, everybody was watching Homestar Runner. It was, if
Mhm.
you were online, you were a fan of Trogdor and Strong Bad and Homestar. And they never had any ads on their content. They funded what it seemed like was their entire operation with just t-shirt sales. So, and Penny Arcade did the same thing. Lots of people were selling t-shirts. So we did that. But then I had come from the telecommunications industry. That's what I was working on during the dot-com era.
Mhm.
And the language in that world is all about your subscription base and how many users you have and things like that. And so I always thought in those terms. So we came up with a digital subscription, and that started, I think, week 6, episode 6. So just over a month in, we started the subscription model. And there was two models. It was you could watch it early, which was really kind of a way to defray the the load on the servers. If you were a paying member, you could watch it on Friday.
Mhm.
If you were a member of the forums, you could watch it on Saturday or Sunday, and then it would go out to the general public on Monday. But that helped us balance the load of when people were downloading this as well. So it was like a double benefit for us.
Yeah, so it's like a little bit
Uh,
for you, but a little bit for us as well.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And boy, that was the overnight success part. That was like you see it in a movie, like where the needle goes up. We turned on the subscription service. We just watched the numbers start rolling. And it was the moment when I realized, okay, this thing is definitely going to work. That was the moment. It was really cool to have that kind of classic, overnight success, own your own business moment.
Yeah.
At the time, I didn't realize how rare that was, but I realize it now.
Yeah. So it was redversusblue.com at that time, right?
That's a good question. So Rooster Teeth came in pretty quickly after Red versus Blue because, I mean, I was just thinking like, you know, a creative who's, probably dealing with a little bit of imposter syndrome on top of everything else.
Mhm.
But thinking, oh man, this is going to be a flash in the pan. It's going to go away. No one's going to, come back to this site again. So
Mhm.
we need to start communicating to them that there's going to be other projects besides Red versus Blue. Because this
Yeah.
thing will probably last like 6, 10 episodes, and then people will be tired of it and done with it. It ended up lasting 20 years, but we didn't know that at the time. Couldn't predict that. So yeah, started Rooster Teeth as a way of communicating to the audience, like there's something else coming. And it was also supposed to be for all the other guys to make their projects under it as well, like Gus and Jeff and Matt. Like Red versus Blue was very much my project, but
Mhm.
this was a creative group of people, like I said, that would come in and out of each other's projects all the time. Like Gus and Jeff they had another company at the time when we started Rooster Teeth, a merchandise company that sold T-shirts called Wootwear. So people were always working on stuff. This was like a group of just really just incredible, motivated, just really savvy entrepreneurs at an early age.
And how long until Rooster Teeth started branching out into, okay, we need to do more than just more than just Red versus Blue?
Boy, it was a bit. It was a bit. It was really about 8 years before anything else really started to like take some of the burden off of Red versus Blue. We
Mhm.
started doing things like shorts. We started doing things like the podcast. Jeff started Achievement Hunter with Jack Patillo. I think there was just other like little one-off things we were trying here and there. We even tried to follow up some of the Machinima success with a project we did in The Sims.
Mhm.
And there was other things, but nothing really like started to really bear the burden of the overall company and running the business until I'd say about year 8, and then it just luckily, very luckily, spread its tendrils out into a couple of different things. So we weren't so single threaded. We still had Red versus Blue, which was a
Mhm.
big hit. We had the podcast, we had Achievement Hunter, and the shorts. While they weren't an enormous moneymaker, I wouldn't say they were something that was a big part of our brand identity, where people
Yeah.
started to get to know us. Because up until that point, we were animation guys. No one even knew what we looked like. We would go to conventions and people didn't know who was who or what anyone did. They knew Gus because he was in one video that we made before we started Red versus Blue. We did an Apple Switch parody. He was in
Mhm.
our very first viral video, but he was the only one. Yeah, we were like you know animation guys. We were like the guys who do the voices for the Simpsons or the Transformers. You know the characters, you don't know the voices behind it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so funny because when I found out Rooster Teeth was shutting down, I made a little tribute video to Red versus Blue, and I thought, oh, it'd be fun to do it in Machinima. I've never done that, but I thought, how hard could it be? I played Halo my whole life, and I went through, and even with all the technology we have today, and with theater mode and everything in Halo, that was like the most tedious and ridiculous project of my life. And I was like, wow, okay, don't know that I want to do that for fun anymore. So I'm curious in the beginning, like how long did it take you to create an episode and what all went into that?
Well, the crazy thing about Machinima, at least the way that we were doing it, it's as close as you can get to live action for an
Mhm.
animated project, right? Because but they're basically like digital puppets, and you have rehearsals and you have takes. You don't have takes in animation, you don't like,
Mhm.
that went okay, let's run it again and see if we can do it better. That's not the way it works in animation. So it is very much like a combination between live action and animation. But it was super efficient. The way we had it set up, I actually think some of the tools like theater mode and forge, I think those put so many bullets in the ammunition box, so many tools at your disposal that a lot of times you can feel like you've got to do too much.
Mhm.
Kind of the beauty of Red versus Blue, especially in season one, was the limitations of it. That,
Mhm.
I always said that if I wanted to write a script and script writing took place on, I'll try to break it down. The guys that worked with you at that point in time would all shake their head, say it was not this clean. But Monday was script writing day, Tuesday was voice recording day,
Mhm.
Wednesday was audio editing. So we'd make an audio like a radio play of the episode, and then Thursday we would act out on the controllers. We would act out we could actually read the waveforms after a while. We got really good
Mhm.
at it, at least the intensity with the head bobs. And then Friday the episode would come out. Thursday night was just encoding all night because we had to encode 6 different versions of the video. That's another thing. Now you just hit upload and go to bed and it processes. And unless
Yeah.
something happens, you're fine. Man, I had to sit there and just render one video, then upload it, then render the next video, then upload it, watch them all to make sure there was no black frames or any encoding errors or
Yeah.
something like that. But yeah, so that was how it was supposed to work. But I always said when I was writing it, I always said that one of the unique challenges of the show is I can't have a verb in the script for an episode unless it's a button on that controller. They
Mhm.
can walk, they can look, they can jump, they can duck, and that's about it. They can't point, They
Mhm.
can't they can't emote in any way whatsoever. If they're gonna do it, it's got to appear. It's got to be mapped on that controller already. They can shoot. That's another thing they can do.
Yeah.
That's it. That's
Well,
it.
here's something that's really funny about that is, Better Call Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul are some of my favorite shows, and in Better Call Saul specifically, there's so many like realization moments, and so I don't know how it's written in the script, but it's like silence. You see a character, they see an object, it focuses on the object, and they make a face, and you're like, okay, this is a whole plot point they've made through
Right.
nothing. But you can't do that in a video game because you can't even see their face, and
No emoting. Yeah.
I'm pretty impressed with the way I can't remember the exact time, but there's times when I think Church was yelling at Caboose or something, and it cuts to you just see Caboose, and it's like I can feel the emotions going on. It's so funny because I'm thinking back, like there's no face. I'm not looking at a face. I'm looking at a animation or a polygon of this helmet, and I'm still feeling this emotion from him.
And it's interesting because there was a lot of debate in the later years when we started doing animation. One of the things that people came and talked to me about was, okay, now that we can take the helmets off of the characters like the freelancers, which became
Mhm.
a whole group of characters in the later seasons, which of the original guys do you want to take the helmets off of? And I was adamant, absolutely, we cannot take the helmets off these characters. Whatever is underneath that helmet, if we show it, it will be wrong to everybody
Yeah.
who's ever watched the show. It'll be almost like a betrayal in a way because it'll be such an uncanny valley for what is in everyone's individual head at that point in time.
It's really fascinating the way that you guys were able to break the number one rule is show don't tell, and you had to tell constantly but find a way to keep
Yeah.
it interesting, which I think
Yeah.
was pretty cool.
Yeah. It reminds me of one of the most basic rules we had with Machinima that had to establish early on was because all the characters look the exact same too, and they're just, different colors, and in some cases, slightly different colors, like maroon and red from one
Right.
another. One rule I have, you go back and watch it, you can probably see it now, is whenever we change a shot, no one moves in the shot before the person who's talking. So that your eye goes to the person who's talking and that's the person who's talking. No one else has any head movement. No one
Mhm.
turns. No one does anything except for, their little idle animation where they sit there and breathe like that.
Yeah.
That's all they do. But the first person who moves in every shot is the person who's talking.
So I'm curious then, that's some of the technical side of it, but as far as plot wise, you said you were always a fan of telling story. What was it, as far as the plot of Red versus Blue, what was kind of the inspiration for that?
Oh, you say because I was just watching some clips from a movie that was a big inspiration for it. There was a lot of things. I would say Strike Halo is of course the first one, and just playing a lot of Halo multiplayer,
Mhm.
and being in the like being in Blood Gulch and yelling at each other from like one room to the next because we used to get together for LAN parties. There was no Xbox Live, so we
Mhm.
had to bring our Xboxes and our tube TVs over to everyone's house in order to like run network cables to different rooms of the house and play Halo against each other. It was
Mhm.
absolute blast. And we'd be yelling back and forth, and it's just like a lot of the banter from Red versus Blue is born out of that. But I would say probably, big inspirations from just me growing up and watching things. Stripes probably would have been a big one.
All the plants will die. That's what comes to my head every time someone mentions it.
Yeah.
You can't go. All the plants are gonna die.
And Dark Star is a big one, which
Oh, I
is
don't know about that.
it's one of John Carpenter's first movies. I think it's his first movie.
Mhm.
And he did it with like the guy who wrote the script for Alien. So
Mm.
it's all these like guys early in their career. It's like just dudes on a spaceship and they're going around and blowing up planets for some reason. It's not really explained why. And
Yeah.
they have a talking bomb in it as well. So you can see a lot. If you go back and watch Dark Star, it's definitely a movie of its time. But I
Mhm.
love that 70s sci-fi. Just love that look. I love the idea of just average working class people somehow ending up on a spaceship and just making their way through the universe.
Yeah.
That's just like an Alien, that whole gritty universe. I just
Mhm.
love that kind of thing. And so I love, about Red versus Blue. It's like we always, focus on the big adventures of the Spartans and this huge war that's taking place across all these different systems. And then it's the military, though. There's always going to be guys who are just sitting around waiting to do something.
Yeah. And how did that develop over time? Obviously, you said originally it was going to be 6 episodes, right?
Yes.
And so then at what point were you like, oh, I got to start like making some real plot and all of these different threads that are going to come together?
Well, a lot of that was driven by popularity. People were liking it, and so it was like if you have something that's popular, the notion is let's keep it going. I'm a little different now than I was then.
Mhm.
It's probably a symptom of having a 20-year series, with 20 seasons. I don't really think about it the same way, but at the time, definitely is like, oh man, this is something that people are interested in. So let's figure out a way to expand this and do more of it. There were other stories that I wanted to tell, but I had to figure out how to fit those into what we'd already put on screen.
Mhm.
um, Established a lot of rules for myself in writing because of some of those mistakes that I made. There's like some rules that I never violate
Mhm.
in writing. One of my big ones is whenever Rooster Teeth grew to be about 400 people, we had a lot of writers working with us, and I would always say the same thing. One rule I have is never say a number at all unless the number is actually important to say. Like a lot of writers will just throw things in like 16 months earlier. It's like, why did you pick 16 months? Why
Mhm.
is it important to say 16 months? Or why say something happened 5 years ago? Because the moment you put a number down, a number is a solid concrete integer. You can't do anything about that once
Yeah,
it
you can't
changes.
play with it very much.
But you could say a few years ago, you could say a while earlier,
Mhm.
previously, you could say things like that and really communicate the same thing. But numbers
Mhm.
can always be a thing to come back to haunt you. So started expanding it, went 5 seasons, and then we had a guy who was working with us, Nathan Zellner, who I'd worked with in college when I was doing projects in um, college with Matt Hullum. I knew David Zellner, his brother, and then Nathan, who went to a different university and was his younger brother. But then Nathan came to work for us. And you should check out their work. The Zellners are just hugely successful. They just did Sasquatch Sunrise, Sunset. What's I forget? The name escapes me right now for some reason. There's Jesse Eisenberg's Sasquatch movie
Oh,
that
okay.
everyone. Yeah, I just saw Hideo Kojima holding up the DVD, and
Mhm.
the cast for their next movie is going to be absolutely enormous. But Nathan, we were sitting around after season 5, and that was episode 100 of the series when we basically called it quits. I said I wanted to go do something else after 5 years. And I was just sitting around with Nathan, and I was talking about like all the backstory that I had written for all the different characters, like Tex and everything, and how I built all this stuff out in my head so it would make sense. and I could write, these funny little comical adventures, but at least there was some kind of skeletal structure in the background so that it wouldn't violate itself. I knew the set
Mhm.
of rules even if I wasn't putting them out there. And that's what Nathan said. He goes, you haven't really shown that stuff to the audience. Why don't you just do that instead of,
Mhm.
and then went on to make the Freelancer saga after that. And then it was another 15 years of producing content for Red versus Blue. Really, honestly, because of one conversation with Nathan Zellner.
There was something I wanted to ask you about specifically about the plot as it evolved past the Blood Gulch era. In my day job, actually, I'm a therapist, and so I watched this when I was growing up. And my wife, didn't play a whole lot of video games. I've since, I've indoctrinated her into the culture, but we went through Red versus Blue, and she ended up really liking it. But she's also a therapist, and so as we're watching, I'm starting to notice all these themes that I had noticed before, but not with the same kind of lens. And we had lots of conversations about it, about alpha and being broken up by all this trauma, and how much that was involved with Texas story,
Mhm.
and how she's created by the narrative that she's told about herself. So I'm curious, like, it's funny thinking about this came out, 2000, that kind of era, 2005 to 2010. Mental health wasn't as relevant in media. I don't feel like now it would be spot on if it came right out. So I'm curious, like, how much research did you do on that, or was it more kind of accidental, or?
Well, it's more so I was fascinated by the concept of AI,
Mhm.
especially the way the characters like Cortana and then some of the other characters in the novels for Halo, and then Halo Wars as well later. But the way they're portrayed, uh, the concept of a purely mental being is fascinating to me.
Mhm.
There's only this, so many interactions that you can have with it. So most of those interactions have to come through those pathways, and the conflict is essentially trauma, right? And
Mhm.
so I started to explore that, and then explored some of the guidelines and restrictions that were set up in the lore for Halo, which we didn't really bring into Red versus Blue. But just like for my own stories that I had written, I had always studied that and knew that I felt well enough to where I didn't go outside, didn't violate the bounds of that without really saying that to the audience. Like,
Mhm.
I think after the first episode, we never even mentioned anything in the Halo universe again. Like a character like Master Chief or anything
Mhm.
like that. We were trying to tell our own story and not just try to be like the Halo, show. Which always kind of over the years, one of the things I've often heard is that people heard about Red versus Blue, but they didn't want to really watch it because they weren't that into Halo, and that's always frustrating to me because of course they would think that
Mhm.
that's heavily associated with Halo because it looks like Halo, but always tried to stay away from it while still at the same time keeping it within the boundaries that Halo had set up.
Mhm.
So in exploring like the trauma of the Alpha and everything that he went through, it was really just to me, it's a study of generational trauma of, but it's without. I mean, it's tough not to spoil it because it's 20 years ago at this point. But
Mhm.
passing it along generationally and not breaking the cycle, and then later generations trying to break that cycle of it. But
Mhm.
what if the later generations are all connected in ways more so than just being the offspring? Which,
Mhm.
if you know the story, you know what I'm talking about. You
Mhm.
know, it's like generations of ourselves essentially. What if we could take generational trauma but apply it to the essentially the reinventions that we make of ourselves on a regular basis as we process those things in our own lives? Can I ask you what type of therapy is that something that you can talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do therapy for foster kids. I mean, I
Wow.
don't have any specific what would you call it, specialization at the moment. I mean, I'm kind of new in the field. I graduated just a few years ago. I'm not giving you a specific number, just a few years ago.
Gotcha. Thank you.
But
Yeah, you
so
went
then
to
I've got some
violence
wiggle
later.
room, right?
Right.
But but no, I just do basic cognitive behavioral therapy, which is, I mean, it just looks like talking and having a conversation. But it's informed by a lot of kind of adjacent therapies, like narrative therapy is one of the biggest ones. So if we have a kid who's struggling with um, anger, we have a lot of issues where people say, you're a bad kid, and kids start to get that idea, I'm a bad kid, and so
Yeah.
we want to separate them from that, because if I'm a bad kid, like, well, that's my defining character trait. What am I going to do to change that? So I'm going to give up on it. But if instead I'm going to go, no, I want to separate you from that. Okay, if we said, what are the things that you do that are bad, and when does that happen? Okay, but other than that, you're a pretty good kid, right? Okay, so if we could just give that a name, And depending on the age of the kid, you might get silly with it. Like, we'll call that Bob, right? This angry part of you, that's Bob, right? And Bob kind of messes you up because you've got everything going well for yourself. And every time Bob shows up, it kind of screws you over. So how are we going to figure out how to build, me and you as a team, how are we going to build a defense against Bob or against whatever this problem is? So instead of him identifying with the problem, I've now separated him from that. And then we together can attack it as an outside issue, if that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. By the way, I just want to say that's incredibly noble work, and it has to be really difficult, I imagine, at times. So I just want to say thank you for doing that work. I'm glad to hear that someone is out there doing that work for these kids in tough situations. But it does, even hearing you talk about, the methodologies you use, later, the AI, the different personalities of the alpha, even after they were gone, the later iteration of the memory epsilon, he was holding on to them because he had learned to use them, and had learned to put them away. Like, there's even some scenes where some of them try to step in and talk, and he just puts them away and puts them aside because he doesn't need them at that moment. So he's essentially, it's a tough line because it's like, you don't want to say he's using them as tools, but they're part of himself. So he's learning what parts of himself to use as tools when he needs to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like, I always get it mixed up. It's either Shakespeare or Nietzsche, which are definitely not the same people. But it was one of them who said, one of them who said, human beings are the playthings of the gods. And it's kind of this idea that it's like, we say I'm angry as if I get angry and I take it and I use it or whatever, but it's more like angry's getting me, because angry's been around forever and I've only been around for this short time. And so it's like, we're inhabited by all these different these personalities or these personality traits. So I think it's I think in a certain way of viewing things, it's more accurate than you might think. And I think what was so cool to me about trying to figure out a way to brag about this without spoiling it exactly, but when you came back in the last season of Red versus Blue, there was something that really tied that together with the character of Tex, who was kind of defined by the story that she was told about herself, and how when that changed, she was able to change her ending. And I could write, a lecture about that scene, that character arc, because it was pretty brilliant. So I was just curious, if you had done a lot of work on that, or if it just kind of came out naturally as the plot unfolded.
I would say it was more naturally. I'd like to say I did a ton of research about it, but I will say that coming back was heavily motivated by that moment. I did want to have a nice send off for the characters themselves, but I also didn't want to leave Tex where she was. I didn't want to leave her like on a down note, on a downbeat. Essentially, I thought she deserved better, and she deserved her full arc, and so it was a big part of me wanting to come back and work on getting Kathleen to come back and play the role as well. And so I appreciate that. I really appreciate that. And one of the ones, it's interesting, out of all the moments in the show, which are a lot of comedic moments, I love to this day, I'll go on a Reddit thread where somebody posts like a picture of a warthog, like of the animal. And I think I'm going to go on that comment thread, and then there'll be like a quote, looks like a puma or looks like something or whatever. And then there'll be a string of Red versus Blue comedic quotes. I love that to this day. I still get a huge kick out of that because I was a big Monty Python and the Holy Grail fan. And we used to walk around Blockbuster just quoting, Holy Grail. Once somebody would hold it up, and say, let's watch this. And I've already seen that 1,000 times. And then you start doing quotes from it, and you go for like an hour just quoting the whole movie.
Yeah.
So I love that kind of thing. But people, when they come up and talk to me, they talk to me about moments. They talk to me about moments like that, where they talk to me about like moments about the church and the director confronting each other, like moments where I feel like we went against the grain for comedy, and like even sometimes went against the grain for traditional storytelling of like, here's the bad guy, he's going to get it. And then the bad guy doesn't get it. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a moment of empathy and forgiveness as opposed to just vengeance, and revenge, and comeuppance. There's still like the arc for the character, which is, not great. And then there's that one where the church confronts the director, and then the end of season 13 when church has a sacrifice. But what does a sacrifice look like from the perspective of the person making it? That was the original ending for the whole series. Was going to be that one when Miles, Luna, and I worked on that, and it was I love that we were able to take risks in the show, and that was a big risk to potentially end the entire series on that moment.
Yeah, I think that's so cool, and especially about quoting it. I mean, I assume you've gotten enough praise for this at this point, so you probably are very aware. But you've created such a interesting niche. Like I didn't know how many um secret Red versus Blue fans there were until because I had never like. I mean, I was pretty young when I watched Red versus Blue, so I couldn't afford any of your shirts or anything. But when Rooster Teeth was announcing it was closing, I was like, I'm freaking doing it. I'm getting a Red versus Blue shirt before I lose my chance. And so
Yeah.
I got one, and whenever I would wear it, like anywhere I would go, there'd always be like one guy who's like, "Dude, I freaking love your shirt." And I was like, "Wow, what a niche thing." And I'm like, "We should be friends. This is crazy." Like I didn't
Yeah.
know how many people there were around me that were so into Rooster Teeth and Red versus Blue.
Especially if it's 20 years, yeah, and so and I was glad to be able to go back and reacquire it because it's like there's so many things in the last year that are important to people, and now it's like everything's just spreading out,
Mhm.
with the amount of content being made online, and not just by people, but soon by just machines pumping stuff out or people making
Mhm.
endless variations on the same joke with memes, and now that'll be, I see AI every time people worry about, some new engine that's creating photorealistic video
Yeah.
from a prompt, I still look at it and I think, well, how come people are still making the same 5 videos over and over and over again? Like there's always a
Mhm.
trend. Like here's Harry Potter in Balenciaga. Oh, now here's the X-Men in Balenciaga, or here's the Wes Anderson X-Men. Here's the Wes Anderson Star Wars. You know what I mean? It's like people. It's still about creativity of what you can do. At least for now. At least for now.
Mhm.
It's about how to be creative, but there's still things that are touchstones of people that are really important, and we're just entering an era where it's just we're going back to the days of 2003 with the server bills. It's just going to become too expensive at some point to keep this thing up on a server somewhere, and it's just easier to turn it off or claim it's got some value to it and then write it off. At some level, it's going to be
Yeah.
more valuable to somebody like that. So I was happy to get it back.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that because I'm going to be honest, that was totally a left field thing that I did not expect at all when I saw that video pop up. So you acquiring Rooster Teeth, like what was the process or the inspiration for that?
Well, when it first started to go down, like it was clear that it was announced it was closing down. That's really kind of when the conversation started.
Mhm.
And I think it's okay to say this, but at first, when I first started talking about it, I realized that Warner was also being really generous with the people who worked there, and they
Mhm.
were letting people like take some of their properties and go off and go independent with them.
Mhm.
And that doesn't happen. I mean, that really, honestly, it's like it's such a rare thing, and I got to give a lot of credit to the parent company for doing that,
Mhm.
because we'd been acquired by AT&T in 2014, 2015, and then went with Warner when they broke off with HBO and HBO Max, and we were part of that. And so the conversation, I kind of laid back a little bit because I didn't want to interfere with anyone's ability to take their show and go independent, right? That would have been
Mhm.
it would have just been too messy. And so about August, I would say, of last year, the
Mhm.
conversation kind of started in earnest when all the dust had settled and the company had been closed for about 3 months. Took a while, took a little bit of time, say about 6 months. So around the beginning of the year, got the deal done. Didn't acquire the full company back
Mhm.
because first of all, there was no longer any employees there. There was no facilities or anything like that. So really just bought back what started as a conversation about Red versus Blue, which was always my baby. And then any show in which I personally appeared, like my face appeared or my wife's face appeared. And then
Mhm.
after a while of like accumulating that and like building out those databases and lists of shows, that catalog started to look like basically just the Rooster Teeth silo of Rooster Teeth. Because,
Mhm.
I started Rooster Teeth for my friends to make other things, and then they did, and then it started like these kind of sub brands as part of Rooster Teeth.
Mhm.
For better or for worse. It's part of the thing was like it was at the end of the life cycle, the original Rooster Teeth was like probably like 5 or 6 different audiences kind of under one roof, and that was kind of a
Yeah.
hard thing to maintain. Everyone had started watching the videos for a different reason, and no one came from the same place. So yeah, so then acquired it and then made the announcement and looking to, turn the website back on this summer, restore some things, put the old catalog back up. I saw Taylor Swift just got her catalog back. That was kind of funny timing.
Mhm.
Um, but it's good. I'm glad to have it back. And then I'll be, continuing what I'm doing now, which is making my own projects, making more narrative projects, which is what I've always enjoyed more than anything else, scripted shows, whether they're animated or live action, and
Mhm.
then producing those under the either Rooster Teeth brand if it makes sense, or under my new company, Box Canyon, whichever one is the better fit for that show.
So how different will the new Rooster Teeth look from the old one, do you feel?
Well, it all depends on like which one you're talking about, right? So if you're a fan of Ruby, for instance, it'll look completely different because Ruby's at a different company now.
Mhm.
If you're a fan of Achievement Hunter, same thing because a lot of people who like associate Rooster Teeth with its YouTube channel, essentially, because there's
Mhm.
some people that don't see Rooster Teeth as anything but a big YouTube channel. They'll probably more so be there for like the gameplay stuff, and I didn't buy back any of those properties, but
Mhm.
the original, people who now have to be like 35, 40, 45, that we started with, we made cool scripted shows and put them out on an episodic basis and just did fun stuff, and that was really cool, but was kind of unlike anything that anyone else had seen before.
Yeah.
It'll look really familiar to those people, I think. And I
Yeah.
think they'll like it. I think they'll like having something like that back. I certainly hope so. I'll like having it back. That's what I want to do with it. And the main philosophy behind Rooster Teeth, going all the way back to episode 1 of Red versus Blue, is we just want to make stuff that we want to see that's not being made, and we just have faith there's enough people out there like us that want to see it as well.
That's really cool to hear. I'm curious, do you have any intention of leaning more towards newer shows that you've come up with and kind of expanding into more original stuff, or going back into kind of reviving some of your older stuff?
Oh, I think there's enough of the old stuff in the catalog to that'll live on its own. I mean, I wouldn't go back to Red versus Blue probably because it's now a complete story and it's done.
Mhm.
There could be something, as a spin-off in that world. I'm trying to think of what show to pick up and continue. The RT podcast one makes the most amount of sense. But
Mhm.
I think the podcast people associate with a specific group of people
Mhm.
who just don't work at the company anymore. I've got my existing podcast, but yeah, there's definitely some shows. I mean, I can tell you we've produced episodes of at least one show it's a classic Rooster Teeth show, and we'll continue to produce that going forward. And then my main focus though is new stuff. I didn't leave the company because I wanted to keep making the stuff I was already making. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I left the company in 2019,
Mhm.
and then we announced it in 2020. They had me kind of stick around for a while because it was a really just crazy time with COVID and everything else going on in 2020.
Mhm.
And so my last podcast was in August of 2019, and then officially announced I was leaving in 2020, and then came back in 23 to do restoration. It came out in 2024. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was good to go back for RVB, but unless there's something that really strikes me, there's something new I could do with it. I'd rather make new things that feel like they're inspired by the Rooster Teeth that everybody knows and loves.
Yeah. Yeah, there was something really cool. I talked with another YouTuber about this recently, about Freddie Wong and Rocket Jump specifically. And I said,
Mhm.
because with a lot of the early YouTubers like you guys and like Freddie Wong and like, Rhett and Link, who are still doing a bunch of stuff, um, it was almost like we'd gotten to know you guys so well, and then when you did a project, it was like seeing a bunch of friends in a play or something. It's like we like it because it's
Yeah.
good, but we also really like it because we just love you guys. And so we're so, like you were talking about the RT podcast with the specific group of people, with Rooster Teeth in general. It was like, if people don't know, if they didn't grow up with Rooster Teeth or haven't spent a lot of time with it, it's kind of hard to describe it. It's like it's just this collection of like parasocial relationships. It's like I feel like I know these guys and I just really like the stuff they make.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, we couldn't have planned for a lot of that. Like when we started doing the podcast, you know, let's take it from the just the perspective of machinima as an art form, right?
Mhm.
We got a lot of press in the early days because machinima was going to be this incredible new art form that people were going to use to make movies and tell new stories and things like that. And we got so much press. Got invited to film festivals that we had been rejected from 1,000 times during college. We got invited to come out and talk about this and what this cool new technology was going to do to revolutionize storytelling as we know it. Kind of like what they're talking about now with every other automated version of animation that's out there.
Mhm.
It didn't work out that way though, because there were so many other changes that happened at the same time. Machinima still lives on. Machinima is an enormous art form, but it's not a narrative art form. It's a personality art form. It's Twitch streaming. It's
Mhm.
Let's Plays. It's still people like tuning in. They want to watch cool things happen in a game environment. They want to watch people use that game environment in a cool way. They want to watch people play the game, which is what Red versus Blue is. We're playing the game. We're just playing it the way we want to play it. We're not shooting the other
Mhm.
characters. We're not playing by the rules of the game itself. We're literally having a play, while
Mhm.
we're in the Halo environment. And yeah, I think Machinima evolved to be that. It evolved to be a personality-driven medium versus being an narrative one. And we couldn't have predicted that. We did that was a part of the secret sauce of Rooster Teeth where we were probably the right people in the right place at the right time.
Mhm.
Because we were okay talking about ourselves. We were okay, like back then, okay, kind of putting our relationships on camera, on mic, and talking through them. We were inspired by people who had, led that charge earlier than us, even people like Howard Stern, who had a long running show where the show itself was as interesting as the guests or anyone else that was on it, just the inner workings of it.
Mhm.
But I will say, just for me personally, we saw the upside of that, and we very much saw the downside of that as well. Like that was something that we could not have predicted how deep those relationships run, and we
Mhm.
could not have predicted the different directions those relationships would take. Talking about parasocial relationships. So I
Mhm.
think a lot of us are a lot more savvy. We could see alarm bells ringing on some of that stuff a lot sooner than we could possibly make adjustments to change it.
Mhm.
And so it's interesting. So I think all the alums of Rooster Teeth, I think, have a different perspective on how deeply they want to go back into that parasocial world.
Mhm. Well, I assume it was probably a pretty. I guess you tell me, but I assume it was probably very maybe jarring at first when you guys started RTX, when you start meeting all these people, or you probably did conventions before that, but when you're meeting all these people that feel like they know you, but you have obviously no idea who they are.
Yeah, that stuff was normal. The big shift for me was because I was a little bit of a different personality. Everyone had their own kind of flavor as to what they were, and
Mhm.
I was kind of like the boss character, you know.
Mhm.
And just by nature of what I did at the company and the start with Red vs. Blue and everything like that. When I would go to conventions, I would meet people, and we would usually sign in pairs, is what we would do, and have meet and
Mhm.
greets in like a desk where two of us were there. And nobody wanted to do it with me to begin with because I had I was like a mini job fair. It was almost like speed dating, but people were like they wanted to come work at Rooster Teeth. They wanted to come be an
Yeah.
achievement hunter, or they wanted to come do a voice for Ruby or something like that. And so that was 90 minutes straight of like a mini job fair, which is totally makes sense. It's a very hard industry to get into, and
Yeah.
people were just trying to figure out a way to do it. Then there was a shift. It was a really hard line shift. I mean, I can't tell you exactly when it was, but it feels like I went to one convention and it was a lot of resumes. And then the next convention, it was a lot of very personal stories and a lot of communicating of very personal attachments to where people would do, I don't know what the official clinical term for it is, but people would do, it would be 90 minutes straight of trauma dumps. Like
Mhm.
people telling me about really intense things in their life and how Rooster Teeth was important to them. And it was like I felt like I got to see the cultural shift of the internet. I feel like I got to see it first person, like right
Mhm.
there, boots on the ground. I got to see it take place. And
Yeah.
looking back, I probably wasn't prepared for how to process that or how to help other people process that as well.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting. It was interesting. It's I feel like you're gonna have to charge me at the end of this podcast. But yeah, it's I feel compelled to share those things. I really do. Because it's more than just talking about like writing stories and putting out DVDs and things like that and building character arcs. There was a part of Rooster Teeth, the first iteration, that was also we were just a boat on the water of the internet. You know what I mean? We were going downstream and we were part of it, but we were also very, very, very affected by the currents of that stream as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of like how much it changed because of, like when I came into Rooster Teeth was more like the 2010 through 2015 era. That was most of what I saw you guys do. And, the internet during that time was so different even than it is now. I mean, it's now that I'm out here making YouTube videos, and a lot of the YouTubers I've met have close to 1 million subscribers, but nobody I know has ever heard of them. Like, we have so many little pockets and niches. Like you said in the beginning, there wasn't that much on the internet, so if you were up there, like, people could see you because there just wasn't a whole lot there. But now that, yeah, it's just it's crazy to think of how much it's shifted, and then you guys as a company, it's like you're on a this constantly moving foundation and trying to figure out how to stay afloat.
Yeah, yeah. And do think there is a I do think there's a huge loneliness epidemic in the world today. And one thing I'm very careful of today when I talk to people and I communicate with people is I don't want to have any appearance or have anything that seems like it would be exploiting that in any way whatsoever.
Mhm.
Even like I'm really careful about. You'll hear people talk about like, oh, we're a family and things like that. I think some of that stuff kind of scares me a little
Mhm.
bit because I think a lot of people. I don't think they do it maliciously, but I think a lot of people doing it without realizing like what path are you walking down, and are you entirely sure where this pathway leads?
You mean as far as the people like making podcasts saying me and the audience, we're a family kind of thing?
Yeah, you're in our family.
Yeah.
You're, like, emotion, a lot of emotional appeals and things like that.
Yeah.
Which is, it's just part of performing, I think, in a lot of ways. But especially when I appear as myself, as me on a
Mhm.
podcast or something like that, I'm always trying to be a lot more careful about that kind of thing.
Yeah, you're making me think of the Bo Burnham quote when he's talking about, "Oh, my audience, we're through thick and thin." He was like, "No, don't stick with me through thick. If I stop entertaining you, throw me to the curb or whatever."
Well, I think,
Um,
I think there can be a little bit of loyalty and stuff like that, but I get where he's coming from on that. You know what I
yeah.
mean? It's it's interesting. It's interesting. We have a lot of experience. There's not many people in the world that have more than 2 decades experience of entertaining online because it just didn't exist that long.
Mhm.
Only I think a handful of us that can even say that. And so I
Yeah.
don't know. I think as like I don't think I was myself as an elder statesman or anything like that, but I do feel like I've got some knowledge I should be trying to communicate to people so they don't make the same mistakes. That being said, the world is also completely different. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Things have moved on dramatically just in the last 5 years since I was making content.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious because we started with talking a little bit about Sneak Peek, and I know you had done some pretty crazy interviews that you got to do really early on in your career. Like, I know you
Yeah.
talked with Adam Sandler.
Yep.
That's kind of the only one that I got to see, but it was funny thinking like, wow, he just like got into talking to these famous actors quite immediately. So I'm curious if you were just exposed to that too early, or if there was a moment when you're with Rooster Teeth that you were like, whoa, we're making some ground. Like what awestruck moments you might have had.
Well, there was always cool ones. Like there was just people who would just reach out and say like, I mean, it's always a shot in the arm, because it's like the difference between being admired and being respected is kind of a thing.
Mhm.
Is the way to describe it. Like it's really cool to have an audience and have the admiration. You know what I mean? But then when other artists respect what you do, that's a different kind of feeling. So
Mhm.
that's always nice. But I don't know. I feel like we never leaned into that too much. We worked with some people that we really liked working with. But aside from maybe a couple shows here and there was one show in particular where we had a banger of an all-star cast. And that was a lot.
Mhm.
But it wasn't something that we ever really pursued. And it's one of the things I think we did right. We just always tried to do what was the best fit, something that felt really genuine. That's important to me.
Yeah.
I feel like the longer you go, um, you either have to be genuine or have to be relatable, and those two things kind of work in opposition to each other. And a lot of people
Mhm.
will give up uh, their being genuine in order to stay relatable.
Yeah.
But I think too, it's like I think it's okay to lose a little bit of your relatability to be genuine. And I wanted to stay genuine on things, and so it's like not trying to pursue like a lot of like big guest stars and stuff. I was the ones we had were fantastic, like having Kumail Nanjiani on the podcast and the Lonely Island guys. I mean, that's just like it just makes sense, you know what I mean, to do
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. But yeah, I always liked the way we approached content, and it felt very grounded and always felt very genuine to me.
Yeah. Well, am I wrong, or did Ed Robertson and Elijah Wood, they approached you guys, right?
Uh, Elijah was a friend of a friend, And it was one of those things where that was, I would say, more of a thing where we got to know him through the community of the Alamo Draft House in Austin,
Hmm.
and some of the people in Austin. And so it was just a really good fit, and we were very fortunate to have Elijah play Sigma. Ed just emailed us one day and reached out and said, I'm just a really big fan of what you guys did. And he was the first person to ever hire us to do something outside of the company. He hired us to make some videos for his tour that they were doing that year, and they would play while they were doing set changes. They would
Yeah.
play red versus red versus blue videos, and it was a great example early for us of, here's a guy with a huge platform who is going to show his audience, which is a very mainstream audience. He's just going to show them something that he likes,
Yeah.
and just have faith that they're going to like it too. And if they don't, here comes the band to play their huge, number one hit, and
Yeah.
that was great. That was great. And so we kept a great relationship with Ed for years and years after that. We ended up
Yeah.
producing, before the company ended, a few of the Bare Naked Ladies music videos as well. So that was always just a great, just a genuine relationship,
Yeah. Yeah, that was a fun connection for me because I didn't really listen to the Bare Naked Ladies a lot growing up, but my wife and her whole family just loved the Bare Naked Ladies. So we're going through Red versus Blue, and we got to the point where Captain Flower shows up, and there was that huge connection of like, oh my gosh, this is the guy from Bare Naked Ladies.
Yeah.
And also, my wife and I went to a Comic-Con in Albuquerque in January, and she actually wore this Red versus Blue shirt, and we got to meet Elijah Wood. And we had this really fun moment where he looked down and saw her shirt, and he was like, hey, it was
Hey,
just
yeah. He's we would have tried to get him back for restoration as well, but it was such, I'll be honest, it was a very low budget to where we just tried
Mhm,
to keep it as simple as we possibly could. But
mhm.
it's always been great. It's always been great, and I really hope I'll be able to work with him again at some point. He's in the new
Mhm.
Toxic Avenger, which I cannot wait to see. But it's funny, like you were talking about how you like wear the shirt out sometimes, and you're surprised by the people that see it. There's a phenomenon that I have whenever I go to like a group and they want me to present like at a film festival or something like that, or sometimes you go to like these Hollywood meetings and it's like a whole conference table full of people. And
Mhm.
then when it gets to me and I say like, Burnie Burns, a company called Rooster Teeth, I'm best known for making a show called Red versus Blue. There's what I always call the straighten up, where there's one guy in the room who goes like this, and it's like I know that's like when he hears it, he like straightens up, and I know that's the guy in the room to talk to essentially at that point in time, or he'll be the
Yeah.
evangelist for it. So
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so funny. So this is at this place that I work with all these foster kids. They, are coming in from different places and sometimes they need new clothes. And we have like this mall that we have for this mall that we've created with a bunch of different clothes in case we're waiting on it. And we get like donations from everywhere. So they get these like random clothes. And one day I had a kid come up to me and he was wearing the one of the RT podcast shirts, like one of the Gavin quotes, and it had the Rooster Teeth logo on it. And I didn't know that he just got it randomly. And I was like, you know about Rooster Teeth? And he was like, what? Like, never mind.
yeah, right.
Yeah, but
I was pretty young too. Probably not sure if
yeah,
listening to the RT podcast would have been best for him. So, well,
yeah,
let me ask you this: is there anything that you would like to see come back from the classic Rooster Teeth catalog, since you're familiar with it?
man.
I'd be a fool to pass up on market research.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been so connected to Red versus Blue, obviously, but I also agree that it's very nicely tied up, and I get nervous anytime people reopen stuff. But um, and like you said about the podcast, I was very connected to the people who were on it. When you and Ashley started Morning Somewhere, I didn't know about it until Rooster Teeth announced they were shutting down because I hadn't been involved in life stuff and kind of hadn't caught up on a lot of internet stuff in a while. And
Yeah,
it was such a refreshing because I was like, oh no, Rooster Teeth, I hate to see them go. But it was such a refreshing, like, oh, at least, there's a little bit of a taste of that, and you having the kind of hint to it in the beginning with your intro, the reference to the RT podcast.
right.
Um, so those two things are very nice to kind of have continuing into my adult life. But um, I don't know. I mean, the RT shorts, I guess, would be, well, I don't know. RT shorts or $1 Million Butt, because $1 Million Butt was
Yeah,
one where no matter, like, Red versus Blue is such a weird show. It's hard for me to get people who are into it unless they're kind of into experimental stuff already. Because usually, if they're not into video games, I'm like, hey, it's the show where they used Halo, and they're like, I'm out. I'm like, no, it's so good. If you could just stick around and like get around how kind of different it is. But with $1 Million Butt, it was like anybody I showed to it loved it. It didn't matter what kind of thing they were into. So it was cool to be able to experience them kind of dipping their toe into Rooster Teeth. So that
Do you
was
know
a
what
good one.
the creative inspiration for that show was?
What?
So live action RTAA is what it is.
Mhm.
So it was RTAA, which is a show I adore to the end of time. I love the Rooster Teeth animated adventures.
Mhm.
And then the RT shorts, it was like right between those two. So we had sourced audio. We'd play an improv game essentially, which now seems to be the thing on the internet is play some kind of improv game.
Mhm.
And $1 Million, but essentially we'd sit down and we'd have a riffing kind of with some structure improv game. And then we take the audio from that and we would shoot the really ridiculous scenarios from it. So, and in that way, it was like RTAA because we would, take the sourced audio from the podcast and Jordan and his team and later the 2D animation team would take it and make these incredibly ridiculous adventures that were well above and beyond the stories we were telling on the podcast.
Well, I mean, it was really fun. I just loved, I mean, especially how ridiculous they were that you guys took the effort to every little comment that somebody made in the kind of riffing session was brought into there. It reminded me a lot of Scrubs is one of my favorite shows that I watched growing up. And it's so funny because as a filmmaker myself, I'm always like, that must have been the biggest pain in the ass to film because every time they've got a dream sequence or a fantasy or whatever, this is a whole new set and all these new props and for like a 3 or 30-second clip that they're going to have. And just all that investment into it, it was hilarious. And I just really always appreciated it. I thought this is a really solid kind of thing.
I appreciate that. It was one of those shows where it just got more and more expensive over time. That and Immersion was another one like that, which is one I've got as well. RT Shorts, Immersion, I feel like you could always go back to. I'm not saying that as if I have plans to. Immersion was always just such a fun show to make. And I always regret it because I put so much effort into that show. And like the lab rats, like Jeff and Gus and then Michael and Gavin, they got to show up and have the best experience of all time. And it's like, I always wish I got to do the stuff that we planned, because it was so much fun to do that show.
Oh, I've always wanted to do where you blacked out the truck and then you had the camera behind, so you're driving a truck in the third person.
It was so cool. We after we shot, that was the pilot episode. We sat there and it was so weird too because I think we drove around on the tarmac in front of what became our offices because it was the old airport. That's where we were shooting it. And so the old airport, those hangars, airports are big, but that's where we ended up moving just a few years after we shot that episode. But the whole crew stayed around for like 5 hours afterwards, just driving the truck to try it out.
Yeah. So, I mean, any of those shows, definitely. It's hard because obviously they're so expensive and there's a lot of coordinating going on. But yeah, I mean, I'm also curious. Let me ask you a couple more just kind of reminiscing questions before we go. But I wanted to ask you about
lightning round.
What kind of hopes do you have for the future of Rooster Teeth, and what kind of legacy would you like it to have when people look back on Rooster Teeth?
You know what? I suppose I should say something here that is has a great marketing statement and is super hype charged and everything, gets people really excited about it. The reason why I bought the brand was to preserve it and to have it. I always said that you should have your own domain. Us, it was roosterteeth.com. So no matter what happens out there in the world, people say you got to have everything on Facebook. Oh, don't put everything on Facebook. Put everything on Instagram Reels. No. Put everything on TikTok and or on YouTube even. It's like make 30-second videos. No, wait, now make hour-long videos. Now make shorts constantly. All that stuff changes. It always seems like it's never going to change. We've seen it change 100 times probably over the course of 20 years. And stuff we thought that was major pillars of the internet that are the backbones of what everyone does, they're never going to go away. We've watched those things disappear. And now Rooster Teeth was one of those things. So I always want to make sure they can honor that by saying it is still a place that if you know roosterteeth.com, you can go and find it and it'll be there. And as long as I can keep the lights on, which should be okay at this point, I want to preserve that and have that there. And also it's a place for me to make something new and put it out there. Things I'm not going to have to adhere to a schedule. I don't have to put out something every single day of the week. I can wait till something is done and I can wait till something is ready and good and put it out there. And I know there'll be people that'll see it. In the meantime, there'll be other shows and maybe some things that we'll tackle that are, revisiting some of our older things, or as anniversaries come up, we'll revisit them or celebrate them. So but the new Rooster Teeth, I'd say, is it'll be a nostalgic place where you can come, but it's also a place where you should be looking ahead rather than looking backward when it comes to new videos that are coming.
And then on top of that, do you know if you have any plans for a complete box set of Red versus Blue? That's something I got to get in there.
I have said I would like to do that if it was entirely up to me. Yes, I would say yes. We're absolutely doing that. Unfortunately, it's not entirely. It is a licensed product. It is it's a big project too. It's at least 20 discs to do that for a complete box set. I would love to do that. The only thing I can say there is stay tuned, and that's not to be kind of trying to build some kind of quiet hype. It's just because I don't have a concrete answer for that, and as soon as I do, you will know because I will be shouting it from the rooftops if the answer is yes to doing that. And it's also it's a risk, even something as simple as, hey, let's make a 20 disc cool box set. Oh, what parts of the world do we source these different products from, like DVDs, and where do we burn them? Because 6 months from now, what will the tariffs on these things be? Like just a couple of months ago, or a couple of weeks ago, it was 100% tariff on movies made outside the US and things like that. And it's like, what qualifies for that? We don't even know, So it's even something as simple as that is adding even more X factors into the decision of whether or not we can make a Red versus Blue complete box set. And I would love to do that.
Yeah, a lot of moving parts to get figured out for sure.
Love moving
parts. But I was just really glad to see that Restoration got a DVD. I know that there was a lot of we were unsure if that was going to happen at first, and I just made a short documentary with Marty O'Donnell and a couple other people about physical media and about how how important the preservation of physical media was. And no, like during that is when the RVB Restoration DVD came out, and I was like, oh, perfect, okay, because I'm learning more and doing more research about, oh my gosh, there are these movies that just get caught up in some random licensing thing and they get taken away, and then everyone's scrambling for the DVDs. So it's cool that at least, whether a box set comes out or not, at least the DVDs for each season exist somewhere.
Yeah, some of them are out of print, and they're like $600 on eBay. Right. So I'd like to have a complete box set because I can hold on to like 50 of them and fund my retirement on eBay. Yeah.
Yeah, eventually, for sure. And then my last big question is, what makes being a part of something like Rooster Teeth meaningful to you specifically?
Oh, to me, it was an amazing place. It was, I got to go to work every day with my friends, and people who I admired. And it was such a privilege to know at some point during the day, I knew I was just going to laugh my ass off. And that's such a rare thing, to be able to be in an environment like that. And the company definitely had its ups and downs, but it was also a place where people could come and work. And then if things went well and you were there for a while, you had a really good shot at making your own show, which is an important thing to me for a guy who spent 10 years, trying to make that first overnight success. I think over time, maybe that became less valuable because, giving someone a shot was something more from my generation. And later that became an upload button, but it was a place where, creative people could come and make cool stuff and collaborate with each other and then maybe get their own thing out there and put it out there and just offer it up to the world and know that there would be people to look at it, and give it that first initial shot. And I always say, you never really forget ever what your first yes was, And I remember my first yes. It was when I walked down to that student television station at the University of Texas, and I asked as a computer science student, and I said to the 5 film students who were working there at the time, I said, I'm a computer science student. Can I come down here and learn the cameras and edit? And there was a station manager there named Ed Garanya. And he said, you want to work here? And I said, yeah. And he goes, okay, whatever, sure. And that was it. That was my first yes. And if he'd have just gone, that sounds hard, or that sounds like, I don't even know how we would do that. Nah, probably not a good fit. Yeah. I really don't know how things would have turned out. You know what I mean? It's like, I just know that was a pivotal moment for me. And I hope I was the first yes for a lot of people. I paid that forward in some way over the years, And I think that's what being at Rooster Teeth was very special to me for, because I think it was that first yes for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And then going into this new generation of Rooster Teeth, I'm curious if you have any specific plans for, what the hiring process looks like. Are you waiting at those conventions for these new stories, or is it going to look different?
It'll be more precise. I think it'll be slower. It's hard to say though. because the first, 10 years, we were under 30 people, and then it just took off like a rocket. It's going to look a lot more like Rooster Teeth in those first 10 years, I think. It's going to be
Yeah.
slow, organic. I'm not in any rush, you know what I mean? It's like, I really do feel like, I've been very happy with my success, and I'm not rushing back into this because I got to be successful or got to get numbers back up or thing. I don't think like that.
Yeah.
And it's going to be, then when you bring people on, it's hard not to have those conversations work their way in very quickly. So it's going to be it's going to be a very precise methodology of finding people who just want to make cool stuff. That's their main goal, is making cool stuff. And I want Rooster Teeth to be once again that place where we make stuff that we want to see, and there'll be enough people out there who want to see it as well.
Well, Burnie, man, it has been, like I said, just an honor getting to know you. I kind of grew up on your stuff. I've been ripping off Rooster Teeth pretty much my whole life. Watching it's like, he's stealing my stuff, but no one watched it, so it was okay. But anyway, just kind of a constant inspiration to me and all my creative friends going, if all we have is a video game and a camera, we can still make something. And so appreciate you for that. And thank you so much for having the conversation today.
Well, that means the world to me. Thank you. Couldn't ask for a better compliment than that. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
This is Steve Downs, the voice of Master Chief, Spartan 117. Thank you for finishing this video on the meaning in between. Chief, out.